The following episode contains a story talking about domestic violence. If you feel that you are in an abusive relationship, you can call the National Abuse Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. They are available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Listeners' discretion is advised.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were Lifejacked.
What do you do when young love turns into violence, abuse, and manipulation? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast. Lifejacked is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Didi Saeed, will share how she found the courage to leave a 3-year abusive dating relationship when she was in her teens. However, she carried the guilt from that relationship for the next 20 years. Didi has worked in the nonprofit industry for over 20 years, which provided the foundation for her to start her own organization. She has written a book for teens and adults to serve as a guide to teach about unhealthy and abusive relationships. Listen as she shares her experience with dating violence and how she helps teens recognize the warning signs of unhealthy relationships and understand the components of healthy relationships. Hi, Didi. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Rowe. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
This is truly amazing whenever I get to meet different people and get to talk about your experience. And so you had a personal experience with dating violence as a teenager. Can you share a little bit about this experience?
Sure. When I was 16, I had a great group of friends. I played tennis on the school's tennis team. I was involved in National Honor Society, Student Council. There was a local organization called Rotary Club, and I regularly attended our church's youth group. So just a variety of well-rounded activities that I was involved in, but I hadn't dated yet. And fall of my junior year, we were leaving school, and an acquaintance asked for a ride home, and then a friend of his also jumped in the car and drove both of them home. And on the way, Brock and I were flirting, and he asked for my phone number when I dropped him off, and we started talking on the phone. And after a few weeks, he asked me out on a date, and it was everything that I had hoped for. He came up to the door and when he picked me up, and opened the car door when we walked out to his car, and walked me back to the door at the end of the date. And we'd had a really good time. And so quickly we became a couple and did fun things like a haunted house with my best friend, and we double dated with another couple to the movies. But after a few weeks, he called me before bedtime one night and told me that he had rolled his dad's truck, totaling it, and he was afraid of what his dad would do to him, and would I stay on the phone with him. And it didn't cross my mind that all a parent would have to do is say, get off the phone, and the teenager would hang up the phone. And instead, I burrowed myself down underneath my covers so my parents, wouldn't hear me if they walked by my room. And I stayed on the phone with him, and every time I would say, hey, I think it's late enough, I think we should get off the phone, he'd say, no, I still hear my dad up, I think we should stay on the phone. And we talked until 3 in the morning, and it was a school night. And so I went to school the next day exhausted, and he wasn't there. And then I was terrified what had happened to him. And I didn't think about telling an adult, so after school got out, my best friend and I drove up to his house, and the first thing that I saw was his dad's truck sitting in the driveway without a scratch on it. You know, it was a lot of feelings of disbelief, confusion. You know, I didn't understand what I was seeing or what he'd told me for hours the night before. And when I walked up to his house, he came outside and started laughing at me and telling me how gullible I'd been for the joke he'd played on me. And it didn't feel like a joke. And I remember, you know, debating that with him. But he kept insisting it was a joke. And I finally was weighing, like, is this something worth breaking up for, or something worth not having this boyfriend for? And I decided to stay in the relationship. And a few weeks after that, we were standing in the hall out after class had gotten out, talking with one of his friends, and we were debating on something trivial that I don't even remember anymore. But I remember trying to look cool in front of his friend. I took my hand and kind of gave a light-handed back tap to Brock's shoulder as I said something, and in return, he took both of his hands and he pushed me so hard that I not only stumbled backwards, but fell and enough to slide backwards and dropped all of my books. And that time, a lot of warning bells went off in my head, but I told myself, like, he wouldn't have done that in front of somebody else. I can't believe this is what I think it might be. You know, I quickly worked to deny it. He was 6 foot, close to 200 pounds. I was 5'6", about 100 pounds. And so I told myself that maybe he didn't realize his own strength, or he hadn't meant to you know, push me that hard or really push me. And so anyways, I denied it, which is a big factor in entering into an abusive relationship.
Really quickly, Dee Dee, so did he acknowledge that he pushed you at all? Did he acknowledge his behavior?
No,
wow.
No. You know, and I was mortified and embarrassed because this has happened in front of somebody else, and that was part of what I used to deny it. You know, he wouldn't have done this in front of somebody else if it was abuse. But, yeah, no, he didn't. And there were other times as it went on that there was occasion that it was in front of somebody else, and he didn't acknowledge it.
And how old were you when this relationship started? How old were you again?
I was 16.
Wow. Okay.
We still did the fun things. Like, a lot of the relationship was still nice, but there was obviously this dark side that had come into it. He started making fun of my friends and family, which made me kind of withdraw from them. He made fun of me, telling me I wasn't coordinated. That's why I wasn't ranked higher on the tennis team. You know, it told me that I wasn't smart, even though I was taking harder classes than he was. And when I would say that to him, he would tell me that I didn't have any common sense. I wouldn't survive in the real world. You know, it was diminishing my self-esteem as I stayed in the relationship, and it didn't cross my mind that wasn't a way to talk to somebody. And I think because we hear sarcasm so often on TV shows and in the school hallways, it tends to be a way that we relate. So I would talk back to it, but I didn't realize the harm that it was causing. And so the physical violence didn't progress yet. It was sexual coercion started, and that was pretty relentless and ongoing, and I finally gave into it. And then the physical violence continued, and it was bad over the course of 3 years. He'd get upset over something, and I remember driving, and he would punch me in the stomach because I couldn't do anything while I was driving. Graduation night, he thought he was drunk, and he thought that I was late picking him up from a party. I wasn't allowed to go to the party, his rule, because he didn't want me around other people. And when I picked him up, being drunk, he thought that I was late. And so I got a black eye and a broken nose and drove him home. It wasn't always that violent, but he pulled a gun on me once, and after 3 years, there was one night that the abuse was really bad, and a few weeks later he said something about it, And in saying it, he told me it was punishment for something that I had done. And for the first time, it clicked. He had always told me if I hadn't have talked to this person, he wouldn't have reacted this way. You know, it was a misstep that I didn't know about until it happened and I survived his wrath. But this time I understood that it was planned. He had time to make that decision and act on it. It wasn't a reaction. And so that was something that started to change in me. Like I saw that it took me a few months to be ready to leave him, but it was what finally was the catalyst for me to leave.
So how has that experience shaped your perspective on relationships, just relationships, period?
Friends I still trusted. I had withdrawn from the majority of my friends, had very surface level relationships. I was pretty isolated in that relationship. Thankfully, all the friends that I had before that relationship were there and waiting and ready to be friends again. I told my best friend the night that I ended it, I told her, I didn't tell her details, but I told her it had been bad. She had guessed when I was in the relationship. And other than that, I didn't really talk about it for 20 years until I recognized what I was carrying and started to work on it. But so friendships were still there, but I had a very skewed perception of what a healthy dating relationship was. I had learned that abuse was my fault and to walk on eggshells. And then I also had a fear of being rejected. It all worked in tandem to kind of make me a people-pleasing person. And I never thought about, is this the relationship that I want? Instead, it was, what does this person want, and trying to make them happy. And when I finally stepped back and thought, oh, wait a minute, what do I want? How do I feel in this relationship? That I finally began to think about what healthy relationships are for myself.
Did you ever fear retaliation from him, or fear that he may come back, or did you ever think about going back to him?
It's a good question, and I'm glad that you asked that, because the breakup can be the most dangerous time in a dating relationship. It's when the abuse tends to escalate even more, or it makes the headlines because one partner has killed or really injured the other partner. I didn't know that at the time, and he contacted me pretty regular for a while. He even tried to blackmail me into staying in the relationship, before cell phones. So when we were dating, he had taken Polaroid shots of me in his hunting jacket, posed in a way that it looked like I wasn't wearing anything underneath it. And he told me he was going to make flyers of that and pass it around. Or once I started dating somebody else, he was going to show those pictures to him. And, I guess it didn't, it made me nervous. It definitely, had a grip, but it was never enough to go back. He did call me one night, just threatening to harm himself if I wouldn't see him. And he made me promise before he would get off the phone that I would see him. I called his parents the next day and told him that I had no intention of seeing him. And I don't even think I called him back. I think I let them tell him that. But so, yeah, there was definitely concern. Thankfully, nothing happened.
Now, I know you shared some warning signs, red flags that you saw early on. But in your opinion, what are some common warning signs or red flags that indicate that the relationship may become abusive or violent? Because you're like, in the beginning, these little things happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it can escalate to become violent.
Right. Yeah. So the early warning signs of like the verbal and emotional abuse, and those can be just as mentally and to the person's health damaging as physical violence can. And it's harder to detect because you don't see the outward, like my mom saw bruises on me occasionally. And so that's not transparent. But so the very early warning signs are, sarcasm, being put down, name calling, criticism, using sexually derogatory names, driving too fast or reckless, and these are beginning to get into, it's very unhealthy, borderline that it could turn into an abusive relationship. It doesn't mean it always will, but, that driving too fast or reckless, their mood swings, raising their voice. If maybe if you're in a disagreement, it escalates very quickly. If they hit a wall, if they ever talk about injuring an animal, those can be some signs of that this could turn into a physically violent relationship. The other thing, though, that I think is important to mention is if you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, it's a warning sign. And I feel like, that's a given. We think, well, of course I want to feel safe in a relationship. But I think today it's harder to see. And so an example is if a teen finds themselves in a situation that makes them feel uncomfortable, like a party that they're at and they're not comfortable being there with their date, or they're taken to an isolated area, just an uncomfortable feeling means that they don't feel safe. And sexual coercion is so common today. If they're feeling pressured to do any sexual activities they don't want to, that's not a safe feeling.
What inspired you to turn your experience into something positive by helping other teens develop healthy relationships?
Yeah, so when I recognized the shame that I was still carrying and God really started the work to heal me, one of the things that I did was work with a good Christian counselor. And at one point, she mentioned that I would be a good poster person for this because in high school I was the girl next door. I had a good group of friends. I was involved in several activities, went to church youth group. I came from a good family. I had all the protective factors around me, and yet I got tangled up in an abusive relationship. So what she said really stuck with me. And it can happen to anybody, any race, any socioeconomic level, parents that are married, parents that are divorced. It can happen to anybody. And I think a lot of times it really flies under the radar. So as I prayed about what to do, I really felt God lay it on my heart to share it in a way that helps others understand how subtly an unhealthy and abusive relationship starts and it grows. And while I wrote, I prayed God show me the words to say and felt that it was important to share not just my story, but also research-based facts. Studies show that if a female is in an abusive relationship, 69% of the time it starts between the ages of 12 and 24. And for boys, it starts in that same age group 50% of the time, because boys tend to be more emotionally and verbally abused, but physical and sexual abuse can happen to a boy as well. For a girl, 1 in 3 will experience it at some point in their lifetime, and for boys, it's one, depending on the research study, it's between 1 in 7 and 1 in 14. So while it was sharing my story to help people understand the dynamics of it, I felt that it was important for people to understand just how often it actually occurs, too.
How do you approach educating and empowering teens to recognize and address dating violence in their own lives?
Yeah, so we do presentations both with teens and with adults to help everybody recognize the warning signs. And during the presentation, when we get through all of the warning signs, either myself or one of the counselors on our board will talk about how to get out of the relationship safely, or if it's an adult or a teacher or a youth group, if they know a teen in a harmful relationship, how to approach that teen and help them. Our website is also full of information, and we also work to convey that everyone deserves a healthy relationship and talk about the characteristics of what is a healthy relationship.
I'm so glad you mentioned that about the peers, and because sometimes as a teen, you're not exactly sure what you're seeing, and you kind of, or maybe it's unfolding in front of your eyes that your friend is actually being, abused, whether it's emotionally or physically. So what are some practical strategies or resources you recommend for teens who may be experiencing dating violence, or they could be witnessing it in their peers' relationships?
Yeah, so if they're experiencing it, first to know that they're valuable and they've probably been isolated and pulled away from friends and family, but they still care about them and they still love them. May not always feel that way, but they do. Like my parents wanted to protect me, but it felt like I was in trouble. They were just trying to help me, and their love for me hadn't changed. So understanding that, and that they don't deserve to be treated that way, whether it's disrespected, lied to, gaslighting, or the physical or sexual abuse. They don't deserve it, and they're worth so much more. It can be really hard to leave an abusive or an unhealthy relationship because not all of it is bad. You're not constantly being berated or hit, so it's you're pulled. There's feelings for that other person. There's good things, and so they're really just confused. It's what it comes down to. But when they're ready to leave, it's important to be careful of how they're going to do so. As I mentioned earlier, this is the most harmful time, or can be, and so to talk to an adult and to let them know what's going on, and if they break up in person, to meet them in a public place and have somebody else aware of what's going on. And then if you think that someone that you care about is in a harmful relationship, I would say first just letting that person know that you care about them, just in a sincere, not over-the-top way. Could even just be spending a little bit more time with them, saying something nice to them. They're in a very defensive place, and they're probably walking on eggshells in the relationship. So as you mentioned earlier, they just need a chance to rebuild trust in somebody else. And then maybe, share a social media post or a brochure or a website or a news article. You could tell them you heard this information on a podcast and want to share in case they or somebody that they know ever experiences one of these things. So really in the beginning, it's just opening up the path of communication to lay the groundwork to be able to open the doors for further communication and help them develop things like a safety plan for being around that person until they're ready to leave. And then when they're ready, how are they going to go about it?
When it comes to dating and teens, especially as parents, it's very hard to imagine your child now entering into a romantic relationship because, yes, there are so many things that are involved in a romantic relationship.
Right.
They're your babies, right? How do you think is the best way to encourage open communication and foster a safe space for teenagers to discuss their experiences and perhaps concerns about not just dating violence, but just dating, period?
I mean, it starts when they're small, encouraging their kids and then their teens to share about their days, the highs and the lows, as they develop friendship, asking about their friends and why they like spending time with them. My kids would always be like, well, I like that person. I'm like, well, why do you like that person? Mom, why are you asking me that question? But I kept telling them, but there's more to, just they're nice, like dive down and tell me what that means. And, I think teens tend to pull into themselves. I think it's hard for them to talk and be open about their feelings and experiencing. They're learning who they are while trying to fit in with their peers, as you mentioned. So it's confusing, and they don't like to ask for advice or help. And so I remember sometimes, I don't even remember what it was that we would talk about, but I remember getting to a place where my kids were resistant with me. Oh, Mom, I don't want to talk about this. And I just always reminded them that we're a family and families talk and work things through. So just trying to lay that groundwork of you don't walk away, you don't shut down, we keep the communication open and we talk, and finding something that, like it's important to do the family breakfast and the family dinner or, whatever it can be. I know schedules are so busy nowadays with all the sports and activities, but finding a way just to connect without it having to be a conversation. And then I found that doing something together that didn't necessarily put the spotlight on them was a good way for conversation just to start flowing. Like if I did an art project with my daughter, she would just start talking about her day. So those were some things that I found to be helpful.
Now, your organization, positively impacting communities. I love it. As I was doing research for this episode before interviewing you, and I noticed that the website is Pick Today. So it's, of course, positively impacting communities, which each of the letters at the beginning are P-I-C, and if you say them, pick. And so I don't know if that's intentional, but I just thought about it. I was thinking when I saw that, and I was going through, and I was like, pick today. And I was like, yes, pick today to put yourself first, to think about you, right? To have healthy relationships
right.
With yourself. So please talk about this wonderful organization.
Yeah, so we started it 6 years ago, and originally it was a school club where we met weekly with kids from 5th grade through senior year of high school and talked about positive character traits with them, how to, uphold them in a school setting with their peers. We also provided volunteer opportunities for the teens, 7th grade through high school, and their communities, such as we did a food giveaway twice a year, and we did reading mentors during the summer where the older kids would be paired with younger kids to play games and practice reading skills with them. COVID came along and, of course, changed a lot of things, and we had to reassess. And so about a year ago, we started focusing more on presenting this information just to a wider audience about healthy and unhealthy relationships.
That's interesting. So what are some of the key elements or key characteristics of a healthy relationship that you emphasize when working with teenagers?
Mutual respect is a big one, and it's I think that's a hard one when you first think about it, but it's listening to the other person, respecting their values, their beliefs, their opinions, being honest, faithful, and able to trust each other, considerate of one another's feelings, comfortable and at ease with the other person, being able to be yourself with them. You can have friends and interests outside the relationship, not cheating outside the relationship, but a healthy activity that you enjoy doing, spending time with your other friends, not just isolated, that this relationship is the be-all, end-all. You've got things outside of it. And you feel comfortable having your partner spend time with your friends or your family. There may be something that the couple doesn't agree on. You're not going to agree 100% of the time, but you listen to each other, you hear each other's thoughts and opinions, and you work together to find a solution that works for both. And it's important to note, too, that maybe a relationship that only one person has these healthy characteristics and the other person doesn't is not a healthy relationship.
Reciprocity is one of the things that I always look for in a relationship, any relationship, whether it's romantic or a familial relationship or friendship. I just look for reciprocity, am I getting also what I'm receiving? For sure.
Right, yeah.
So looking ahead, what are your goals or aspirations for your work in promoting healthy relationships among teenagers in the future?
Really just to get the word out and to speak with as many people as possible. I think many people don't understand the extent of the problem or don't think it could happen to their family, right? That's easy to do with anything in life. It won't happen to me. So maybe they're not aware of the warning signs or don't discuss it. I've had some parents tell me that every teen needs to read this book, so just getting it into the hands of as many people. And then really we'd like to expand on prevention and add an element for recovery from the relationships.
Now, I have to ask you, is it just mostly girls that go through this? Do you just mostly talk to young women, or do you also talk to boys?
No, we also talk to boys, and it's hard because I'm a girl and experienced, so my story tends to skew towards girls, but no, it happens to boys as well, and so just educating them of it. But I think also it doesn't happen as frequently to boys, so like with my son, I tell him he's a protector, and if he ever sees it, to step in and help. Which goes for girls too. If they see a boy being mistreated, whether it's verbally or physically or emotionally, to step in and support him as well.
No, that's so true, because I have 3 sons, and I think about, and I have cousins, and I don't have any brothers, but I have cousins, and, there are some pretty manipulative and abusive women out there as well, and also physically abusive, like you said.
Right.
It may not happen as often, but it's still abuse on the other side, so it's not just young women that can experience this, but we also have to think about our boys, and not just talking to them about them making sure that they are not the aggressor, but also making sure they are not the victim as well.
Right. So. No, definitely. Yeah. No, because it does. And I think for boys, it's probably even harder to come forward and say something about it. So, yeah, no, definitely making sure that boys are aware of it as well.
In your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
A few things come to mind. For me, it's remembering something else challenging that I've done before, and remembering that it also started as difficult and uncomfortable, but I found a way through it and kind of gaining some confidence from that. Another one is as I've taken on new roles or promotions or new responsibilities, and it's difficult or uncomfortable, bumpy, I keep the analogy of climbing a mountain in mind. Climbing up is difficult, but the view and the accomplishment are worth it. So that one, I've used that one for 30 years throughout my career and through life. But also 2 Bible verses, Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Like I visualize, I'm in a difficult situation. I visualize God holding my hand. And then the other one is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And just remembering that he's given me strength.
That's mine right there, Philippians 4:13. Let me tell you. Yes. Well, Dee Dee, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Please take the time to let everyone know how they can purchase a copy of your book or contact your organization to speak to a youth group.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we appreciate being on the show so much tonight. Thank you so much for having us. And as you said, if you want to visit the website, it's pictoday.org. And there's a list of healthy character traits, warning signs of unhealthy and abusive traits, how to help. There's a page with other resources. We also have a store page where you can purchase the book as well as magnets or bookmarks. And the book, It Doesn't Start With a Punch, is also available on Amazon.
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
I would just say, one, everybody deserves a healthy relationship, but as you enter into whether it's friendships or dating relationships, just listen to your gut. If you ever feel uncomfortable, you're ever second-guessing yourself, or don't feel like yourself, something is just off, stop and listen to that and leave whatever the relationship is if you need to. When I heard the first warning signs, and I told myself it didn't matter, if I'd listened, I would have saved myself so much pain and heartache. And just remembering that you're valuable and deciding what's important to you in a relationship. And if those traits aren't in that relationship, it's probably not the right one for you. And it's okay to move on. There's a healthier one that's out there.
Well, Dee Dee, I wish your family and you nothing but blessings and abundance. Thank you for being a guest. Please take care.
Thank you so much for having us on the show tonight.
You've reached the end of another episode of Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast. Connect with me at www.lifejackedpodcast.com. Don't forget to sign up to the blog so you won't miss any events or episodes. And every now and then, I'll give away free materials from my guests or from me. Remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.